modified a little bit in a way that other agencies have consistently have not.
All right, but opposition MPs say it's not good enough that 6 years after its launch it hasn't released a detailed public progress report. Do you agree with Kelvin Davis about that aspect of it?
I would like to see more of the efficacy of the program. I have in the past, and I have on this program, given it a fairly broad ambit of time to, hey, how long is this going to take to work? I think it's going to take some time, just because of the depth and breadth of the issues that have been consistently not dealt with. And that's why I made the comment about, past tense for other agencies. But it's probably time soon to be able to see better, and I don't know whether that's the way the contracts are awarded and the way the results and the programs are being monitored, but it's probably time to be starting to see some of that.
Because his point is that he says the Mangere Marae, which opened its doors to the homeless 2 months ago, it helped over 60 families. He questioned why Whānau Ora could not provide the same level of data. I mean, is that your feeling when you look at the story on the face of it? Do you think I need to know more?
I quite like to know what they're doing and stuff, yeah. And unfortunately, they're going to attract more negative attention and questions about them than some other organisations might. So they kind of owe it to themselves to be able to front up and say, well, this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on, this is what's working.
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned about how the whole Te Puia Marae thing has rung out. It was some very well-meaning people, and you can't question. I mean, Huri Moana Dennis, who's the chair of that marae, has got a heart as big as the wharenui. He is incredibly well-intentioned, and they're trying to do the right thing. But something that happens in a flash and in the glare of public attention and the media, gets a little bit of life of its own for a while. But for how long for?
No, but they gave those people a place to sleep that night, which is what was needed, something immediate. It's not the long-term solution, but surely by opening their doors that very day, they've helped.
Yeah, no, that's the point I was very slowly getting to. Was how is that? Yes, they did do that. It is not the long-term solution. So then how is it comparable to the other work which is being done out there in the community?
Speaking of that other work, I know I haven't left you much time, but I wouldn't mind just a brief thought before we go, because we've talked in recent days about ERO's new push for schools to target individual students now who are failing, and the need to keep doing the same in families to reduce violence against children in the wake of Moko. Esther says, with Family Start, for example, vulnerable families are worked within their homes intensively on social health education goals until the child's age 3 to 5. Amazing work. But we have long-term problems in New Zealand like poverty, colonisation, social exclusion that are going to require even deeper macro solutions. Can we unpick that slightly in a very short space of time? No one disputes poverty is crippling, but is it poverty of the type that governments can solve, despite all the fine words spoken about it? What do you think?
I think probably not, or at least not in the short term. Something that should be addressed, and we shouldn't be afraid of trying to solve it. But I haven't heard enough about what ERO is planning to convince me.
I wasn't really about ERO per se, but I mean, I guess I was saying, to cut a long story short and try and couch a succinct question, are we a society that talks compassion? And obviously some people practice it, but deep down it's a more selfish society than we realise.
Absolutely. We haven't opened our homes to homeless people. I haven't, you haven't. I think I just called you selfish, sorry. But no, I agree. I think we are.
Chris, last word?
I have even laid awake looking at the ceiling thinking about this, and I don't have an answer, but I do think we have to try things, and that's one of the reasons why, I think Whānau Ora is worth bearing with for a while, to try and get some change at those hard-to-reach families, because no one else has achieved it and nothing else has worked thus far.
Chris Wikaida, thank you very much for coming onto the panel. Nice to have you back.
Thank you.
Alan Reid, very good of you to come, and I hope you both have a lovely weekend.
You too.
As I hope you do, as I hope everybody does. Thank you for listening, and John Campbell's Checkpoint coming up.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell, and on behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, the standoff in Palmerston North that saw a kindy and a school lockdown and brought a community to a standstill is over. We are there. Campaigned over, petitioned for. The immunotherapy cancer treatment Keytruda is now available free to patients. We talked to Barry, the first patient to receive it under the new regime. But should Keytruda have been available before now? Australia goes to the polls tomorrow. England must do without Boris and their race to be PM. And a week after Brexit, where have global economies settled? And what has the pound done? Plus, for Russians out, which means for Kiwis in at Rio, we will look at some good fortune for some rowers. All of that and more coming up in the next 89 minutes. But first, as always, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The police have arrested a fugitive after a major operation that shut down parts of a Palmerston North suburb for more than 24 hours. They say the day-long siege has been resolved peacefully. Caleb Kowaleski, who's 25, surrendered to police at about 4:15 and is now in custody. Manawatu Area Commander Inspector Sarah Stewart says the situation was resolved without injury or incident and thanked the local Cloverley community for their patience, assistance and support. Mr Kowaleski, who had warrants out for his arrest, fled police in a grey Mazda, triggering an armed defenders squad call-out late morning yesterday. The police say scene examinations of the property where Mr Kowaleski was holed up are now underway. Australian voters are being warned of the chaos of a hung parliament as the 8-week-long election campaign draws to a close. The latest polls have the election too close to call, with some commentators warning that both the major parties could face some serious post-election challenges. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
The tightness of the vote has the party leaders on the hunt for every last vote, especially in the key marginal seats. There is fear of a hung parliament causing chaos and instability. The Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has used his final televised pre-election speech to again plead with electors not to risk independence or a Labour protest vote. Labour's leader, Bill Shorten, says he's chasing people's first preference votes because Australians want a clear election result. Both leaders go into tomorrow's election buoyed by polls showing they can win, but nervous about which way undecided voters will jump. In Sydney, Demelza Leslie.
A scientist says the healing ozone layer over Antarctica could reduce the occurrence of sunburn and skin cancer in New Zealand. Scientific research published in Science shows that ozone is recovering due to the decline of atmospheric chlorine from chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. A Waikato University chemistry lecturer, Joe Lane, says in 1987 restrictions were placed on the ozone-depleting substances through the Montreal Protocol, which has now paid off.
Those restrictions have finally started to take effect, and what we're now seeing is that the ozone layer is recovering, that hole is getting smaller over Antarctica, and hopefully should a long-term result in reduced incidence of things like melanoma and skin cancer, sunburn and the like in New Zealand.
A Waikato University chemistry lecturer, Joe Lane. A business group says building a new port in Auckland would need major international investment. A working group estimates a new port, which could be on the Manukau or the Firth of Thames, could cost between $4 to $5.5 billion. The Employers and Manufacturers Association's chief executive, John Campbell, says the new port faces huge infrastructure costs which can't be matched by the current port's profits. He expects the port could take up to 50 years to build.
No matter how successful the port is, it will never be able to afford to move in the manner that this report suggests. So there will be other funding streams.
Mr Campbell says while many people want to invest in ports, it's unlikely there'll be great interest yet due to long timeframes and planning issues. Soldiers from several European and Commonwealth countries are holding an overnight vigil at Thiapval Memorial in northern France to mark the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme. Earlier, Britain's Prince William spoke at the vigil. He said people should never forget the sacrifice made by British and soldiers from the Commonwealth, including New Zealand.
Tonight, we think of them as they nerved themselves for what lay ahead. We acknowledge the failures of European governments, including our own, to prevent the catastrophe of world war. we offer our humblest respects to each man who fought in the Battle of the Somme, from every corner of the British Isles and from across the Commonwealth.
Prince William. 2,000 New Zealanders were killed in action at the Somme and another 6,000 wounded, nearly half of the 15,000 New Zealanders in the battle. In sport, the New Zealand rower George Bridgewater says he's hoping the emotion around their late selection for the Olympics will help in their performance in Rio. The men's quadruple scull has been selected after a Russian crew was banned following a positive doping test. The New Zealand crew had missed selection by one place at the recent final Olympic qualifying regatta, which was won by the Russians. The crew found out today, and Bridgewater admits he's a bit overwhelmed.
I guess it's been a bit of a roller coaster this last week in terms of being called back into training, and then now finally today getting the confirmation. It's just fantastic news. We're all pumped. It was such a disappointment to miss out at the qualification regatta, and we missed out last year by one place as well. So hopefully we can use some of that to drive us on.
Meanwhile, the men's tennis doubles combination of Michael Venus and Marcus Daniel have also been selected for Rio, and Venus is in action at Wimbledon tonight in the first round of the mixed doubles. Also on court is Marina Irakovic, who'll be hoping to reach the fourth round at the All England Club for the first time when she takes on 12th seed Carla Suarez Navarro of Spain. A win tonight will guarantee Irakovic $150,000. Super Rugby resumes tonight with the Chiefs playing the Crusaders in Suva. Both sides are starting a number of their All Blacks as they try to secure a playoff spot. And Portugal has qualified for the semi-finals of Euro 2016 after beating Poland in a penalty shootout. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life harvests a few heritage apples in Southland. Russell Fuller brings the sport, British sport, which includes England's Brexit from the European Cup at the feet of Iceland and Wimbledon. And we have an eyewitness account of the birth of the American moral majority, which will go nicely with a sonic tonic dedicated to fundamentalist interpretations of the Word of God, which could get me into a lot of trouble, on Nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow: Northland to Waitomo and Taupo, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine with early morning frosts south of Auckland. Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taihape, fine, a few showers spreading north tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa and also Wellington, showers clearing Wellington and Wairarapa this afternoon, and elsewhere this evening, fine tomorrow with early frosts. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with morning frosts. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine, a few showers tomorrow, turning to rain in Fiordland, later with heavy falls. Otago and Southland, fine, high cloud increasing tomorrow with a few spots of rain from afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, showers and southerly gales easing later tomorrow. It's 5:08.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Police, as Katrina said, have arrested a fugitive who's been on the run in Palmerston North since yesterday morning. Caleb Kowaleski, who's 25, was taken into custody just under an hour ago, about 4:20 p.m, after roughly 30 hours on the run. Earlier, police had warned he was dangerous and locked down a large part of the Palmerston North suburb of Clovelly, stopping residents from moving in or out of the area. This involved a kindergarten and a school, as we reported on live last night on Checkpoint. But now this emergency is over. Maya Burry reports on the events leading up to the arrest.
Mr Kowaleski, who has warrants for his arrest, fled police in a grey Mazda, triggering an armed offender squad call-out at about 11:15 yesterday morning. At a media briefing this afternoon, Inspector Sarah Stewart explained how police had been searching for him since he fled.
At this stage, again, we are hoping and wanting Caleb to give himself up. We're wanting him to come forward to police so that we can resolve this matter successfully and safely for everybody involved.
Before Mr Kowaleski's arrest, his adoptive father, Jim Antcliffe, said his son wanted to resolve the situation peacefully. He said he talked to the 25-year-old earlier today.
He seems to be in a good state of mind at the moment. He wants to resolve this peacefully. He's just pissed off with the system at the moment.
Earlier in the afternoon, Ms Stewart said police had been in communication with Caleb Kowaleski and they were confident he was within the cordoned area. The Palmerston North Mayor, Grant Smith, echoed that message.
I would like just to reassure the community and the city that indeed other schools are safe and that this has been isolated to that area.
Police narrowed the cordon throughout the afternoon, allowing some people who spent last night sleeping in hotels, welfare centres or at family and friends' places the chance to go home. But those residents still stuck inside the cordon were asked to remain vigilant by keeping their properties safe and locking their doors and windows. One resident, Sarah Pore, had been stuck inside her house since midday Thursday. She was becoming frustrated with the situation.
We've all been, airing our frustrations because the police aren't actually talking to us at all. We're just sort of stuck in this little ghost town at the moment with no communication. Kind of like you're on home detention or something at the moment because you can't leave.
Inspector Sarah Stewart said police had taken a systematic and coordinated approach to clearing the area and finding Mr Kowaleski.
We are working as hard as we can to resolve this as quickly as possible, but what is important is that we do this in a systematic and considered way. We've got highly trained teams of staff operating within the area. They are doing everything they can to make sure that we get a successful resolution for this incident.
Eventually, the police tactics worked and Mr Kowaleski was finally arrested, paving the way for life to return to normal in Clovelly. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Our reporter Michael Kropp has spent the day in Palmerston North and joins us now live. Michael, hello. There have been developments in the past half hour or so, I hear.
There have been developments. Of course, Caleb has been apprehended, but in the last hour or so, we've seen officers gearing up to leave. We saw the dismantling of the command unit. There was a fire service truck where they were stationed. We've seen officers, as they were leaving, they were still wearing their balaclavas. Some of them were sweaty. We saw the armed defenders' trucks leaving. So it's been all go here at the cordon. I was speaking with a woman earlier whose family was still in the house overlooking the house where Caleb had been holed up. And she said the police had been using her house, using her upper story to look out. And then just as I was speaking to her, she started laughing on the phone because the Armed Defenders Squad had decided to have a spot of food because they'd caught the man. And then at about 4:30, Manawatu Area Commander Inspector Sarah Stewart told the media that he was in custody.
I'm very pleased to announce that a few minutes ago, Caleb Kowaleski surrendered to police safely. I'm extremely proud of the work done by our teams here today from Wellington and Manawatu. They are an extremely committed team and have brought about the successful conclusion of this incident. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the community and the wider support from the agencies and organisations that assisted through this difficult time. We really appreciate the patience of everyone that's been involved, and very shortly we will be announcing a program of reducing the cordon so that people can return to their home addresses.
Michael, I spoke to the man who was identifying himself as Caleb's adoptive father. He was really worried about Caleb and how this was going to end, and he said he'd been telling him that he didn't want a body at the end of all this. There was some really heavy guns being deployed by the AOS. There were serious concerns throughout much of the day about how this was going to end. It's ended really peacefully. How is the community there reacting to all of this?
They're hugely relieved. At the end of Sarah Stewart's briefing just before, the community were also there waiting at the cordon, waiting to hear what she was going to say, and they broke out into a round of applause. Now, as you heard at the end of that grab there, the cordons are gradually being decreased, and there's a queue as people wait to get home, and that's all they want. They just want to be back in their own homes, have a cup of tea, get in their own beds, have a shower. But that's for tonight.
Yeah, that's tremendous news, Michael. So there are people, just before we go, there are people returning to their homes not far from where you're standing there now who haven't been there since yesterday morning. Is that right? People going back for the first time?
Yes, people. Right behind me, the cordon is still in place. This is at Herbert Avenue. The cordon is still in place, but it's set to decrease very, very soon. Hopefully, very soon, because a lot of the locals, I've got a woman here who I spoke with just after 7 o'clock, Amanda Dawson. She wants to feed her dog. She also wants to probably have a shower and get some clean clothes on, I'm sure.
Michael Kropp live from the cordon, which is now, as you can see if you are watching, being lifted in Palmerston North, the Clovelly community there. It's just coming up to 5:15. After a marathon 8-week election campaign, actually it seems to have been really compressed, Australians will finally have their say when they go to the polls tomorrow, and with opinion polls showing the result really is too close to call, even by the standards of polls which seem to be consistently getting it wrong at present. The Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Opposition Leader Bill Shorten are spending their final moments on the campaign trail, both of them in Sydney. Mr Turnbull is there reinforcing the coalition's message on jobs and growth. Steady as she goes, he says, while Labor's Bill Shorten is driving home his message about protecting Medicare. Shortly we'll cross live to our reporter Demelza Leslie in Sydney. But first, this report from the ABC's political correspondent Louise Yaxley.
With a day to go, frontbench Liberal Christopher Pyne is still seeking votes.
I'll be out poster waving in Glenside today in my electorate. That's the most demeaning job in politics.
The opposition leader makes it clear that he wants to change jobs.
Hello everyone, my name is Bill Shorten. I want to be Prime Minister of Australia.
The Prime Minister says it's up to the voters to decide, but he told Channel 9 if he keeps his job, he won't be moving into the official Sydney residence.
We'll continue living in our own house and save the taxpayer the expense of buying our groceries when we're in Sydney.
The man with an influence on all of those plans is the South Australian Nick Xenophon, who's eyeing off seats in the upper and lower houses.
I think we will go well. We'll come second in a number of seats, but because Labor and Liberal are effectively exchanging preferences with a split ticket, in a sense, that will make life more difficult. But look, if the polls are to be sort of believed, Mayo, Barker and Gray are three that I've seen the polling on, which shows that we've got a fighting chance.
The signs are that whoever wins, they'll have to negotiate with a Senate that's made up of independents, Xenophon team members and Greens. And Greens leader Richard Di Natale wants his party to play a key role.
There's never been a more exciting time to be a Green. This is a party that is on the move. We have seen record numbers of members join the party. We've got volunteers right around the country who are joining with us to take a stand for a more decent, more compassionate, more prosperous Australia.
Malcolm Turnbull's made his election eve pitch in the Liberal-held seat of Reid in Western Sydney.
If we vote for Liberal and National candidates, senators like Maurice Payne, candidates for the House of Representatives like Ned Manoon in Werriwa, Craig Laundy here in Reid, what will we get? If we vote in sufficient numbers to do that, we will get a stable coalition majority government, delivering on our national economic plan, which was brought together in the budget. The alternative, a vote for independence, a vote for Greens, a vote for Labor, is a vote for instability, uncertainty, chaos.
And Bill Shorten reinforced his Medicare message at a rally in Sydney.
He is persisting with freezing the rebates that are paid to GPs. A 6-year freeze will invariably mean that bulk billing becomes a thing of the past in many doctors' surgeries around the country.
Health costs have dominated the campaign. Mr Shorten's pledge to unfreeze the Medicare rebate for GPs. Malcolm Turnbull insists health services are not under threat.
Bulk billing has never been higher. It has increased to the highest level in the history of Medicare. Medicare is absolutely guaranteed. We will be spending more money on Medicare every year.
Opinion polls are tight. Labor's message is that it can win. If it falls short, the party's rules say there should be a leadership ballot. Anthony Albanese contested last time. On Channel 9, he wouldn't say if he'll run again.
We're not countersing anything other than victory tomorrow. We're working very hard each and every hour, and that is our only focus.
If Bill Shorten does go down, do you guarantee not to challenge?
That is our only focus, is to win.
Yes, it's a fascinating business, Australian politics. Compare and contrast. John Key became Prime Minister of New Zealand in 2008. Since then, Australia's had Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, their first female Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd again, just for 3 months the second time, Tony Abbott, and now Malcolm Turnbull. Will they get another Prime Minister on Saturday? Let's go to Demelza Leslie, who's joining us live from Sydney. Hi, Demelza. Before we go on, are Australians suffering from ennui? Are they completely over their own politics, or is there real interest in this?
Yes, well, it has been what it's been labelled here in Australia as a marathon campaign. 8 long weeks of electioneering. Though if you walk around central Sydney, you wouldn't even know an election's going on. I can tell you that I've been from one side of Sydney to the other over the past week,
And I've probably seen maybe a dozen billboards, placards. I've seen only about 2 or 3 teams of politicians electioneering. So, to be honest, it's not in your face. But if you do turn on the television, there's some very pointed ads. So, they've been really in your face. But aside from actually out and about on the streets, it's not really there. And I think for the average Australian, they're probably sick of hearing about the election, but it's probably not saturating their environment quite yet.
Demelza, New Zealand is not disinterested parties. Australia is our biggest trading partner. They are our biggest source of tourists. Obviously, we give a damn about this at some level. What's the Prime Minister's take on it? Has anyone asked?
Yes, John Key, he has said his preferred Prime Minister is Malcolm Turnbull, only because he's obviously been working with Mr Turnbull over the past 10 months since Malcolm Turnbull ousted Tony Abbott as the leader of the Liberals. So his preference is that Malcolm Turnbull stays at that job just because, they've already started developing their relationships a little bit easier. And to be honest, if you look at the polls over here, Malcolm Turnbull this week, because prior to this week it certainly wasn't happening, he's taken like a little edge over the Labour leader Bill Shorten. So, if you were a betting person, you might bet that the Conservatives will get in tomorrow. But in saying that, though, it's very interesting because, anything can happen on the day. I mean, take Brexit, for example. So everyone over here is slightly nervous about what the election's going to result in tomorrow because Australians are just really scared of the likes of a hung parliament. They just don't get it. In New Zealand, we're so used to MMP. We're used to our big parties having to work with small parties to get legislation through. But over here, they really hate it. They don't like the idea of it, and they really want a clear majority to lead them. So I think Australians tomorrow will want a clear result. But, when you've got polls saying 50-50, it's neck and neck between the coalition and Labour. I mean, it's not looking too flash, to be honest.
No. Demelza, you've been working really hard this week, filing for Us and Morning Report. Big old days, and I know you're going to go and have a glass of something delicious from Margaret River. But before you go, who are you picking? Who's going to win tomorrow?
Well, I think this week Malcolm Turnbull really has taken the lead. Even if it's only shown by like 1 or 2% in the polls, I really do think Brexit played into his hands. I believe that, he's convincing Australians that they need strong, steady hands that are stable, that can really drive them out of this global economic mess, if you like. So I really do think that Australians are picking up on that. And I think for Bill Shorten, it hasn't been his best week, in which, going the last week and the final days going into the election is probably not the best time to have your worst week. So, he's been really hounded on his claims on the, healthcare system here, Medicare, and saying that the coalition are going to destroy it, and he hasn't been able to back up a lot of those claims. So really, he has been outshone by Malcolm Turnbull. So I think that will give Malcolm Turnbull's coalition the edge. And, I'm predicting that they'll probably win tomorrow. Maybe not by too much of a margin, but enough to have majority in Parliament.
Demelza Leslie live from Sydney, where it looks a beautiful evening via Skype. Thanks so much, Demelza. The time on Checkpoint is 23 minutes past 5. Coming up on Checkpoint, a convicted fraudster who preyed on the vulnerable is sent to jail for the 3rd time. It's coming up very shortly, and we hear from the first advanced melanoma patient in New Zealand to have a free infusion of immunotherapy drug. This is under the new post-Pharmac approval regime. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Do text us 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We've been hearing a lot from Brits this week, expat Brits, about Brexit and what's going on. If you are an Aussie, and there are an increasing number of expat Aussies in New Zealand with an opinion about the election tomorrow, we'd love to hear from you, 2101 or checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget Twitter and Facebook. The case of Yvonne Cash is a catalogue of broken promises. Cash approached small businesses offering to invest money. She offered a software firm $1.8 million, but there was one problem. She told the company's owner the money was tied up in Australian accounts and they had to make a contribution to have the money released. In reality, of course, there were no Australian accounts, no money, and the company received nothing. Today, Cash was jailed for the 3rd time on fraud-related charges, this time to 13 months in prison. Our Auckland court reporter, Edward Gay, filed this story.
Yvonne Cash used business investment websites to track down business owners to offer investment. She offered one of them, a garlic grower, $50,000. She told him the money was tied up in an Australian account. Judge Kiernan said the man paid her $1,500 to have the funds released, but the investment never went ahead.
He says it affected his personal and work life. He was desperate for the investment to work, and when it all fell through, it was absolutely devastating.
Another of Cash's victims was a software company owner who was promised $1.8 million. Judge Kiernan said Cash, who used aliases, asked for $11,500 to free up the money.
He says it has been life-altering. He really thought the investment was legitimate. He had to shut the company down into minimal running costs. He had to lay off staff as a result of the drop in cash flow.
Cash even duped her landlord, initially promising to buy an Orewa cafe for her to run and then a bed and breakfast in Queensland. The court heard how she used forged documents from the Australian Attorney General and Ministry of Justice to make it appear she had the funds, but the sale never went through.
Obviously there was financial stress. They had a house almost packed, ready to go to Australia, and it was a very difficult time, which impacted on her health.
Cash was due to be sentenced last month, but it was postponed after she told the court she had contacts in Australia who'd be willing to lend her money to pay the reparations. But like Cash's previous promises, that came to nothing, with no sign of the money today. Her lawyer, Lawrence Herbkey, said his clients still hope to make the payments.
She has, in good faith, attempted to make the reparation available.
Well, I can't accept, Mr. Herbkey, it's in good faith, because there's absolutely no evidence before me that reparation is viable, forthcoming.
The court heard how Cash was jailed in Australia for fraud-related offending and is still paying over $8,000 in reparations for offending in New Zealand. She made further promises of reparation to her latest victims during restorative justice meetings, saying she was about to receive a $2 million divorce settlement. But the Crown prosecutor Jeff Simpson said those promises were never met.
It appears to the Crown that the restorative justice process has been manipulated in order to reach a positive outcome to achieve a credited sentence. And that, Your Honour, puts the victims in a very vulnerable position, because having been misled once, they have now been misled again.
In sentencing, Judge Kiernan referred to Cash's apology to the victims.
You said to the probation officer, and I quote, "I've had many sleepless nights and it's better that it's over. I'm sorry for what I've done. I have no intentions of crossing that line again."
But the judge said it was hard not to view that statement without cynicism.
If it is true, time will tell, of course. Perhaps this may be the last time that you appear in court for fraudulent offending, but given your history, I have to say that would be a huge change in behaviour.
The judge did take time off Cash's sentence for her early guilty pleas and taking part in the Restorative Justice Conference. With those discounts, Cash was eligible for a sentence of home detention, but Judge Kiernan said that wouldn't be appropriate.
You are a long-time fraudster. Prison is the only appropriate sentence.
Cash will also face conditions on her release from prison. For Checkpoint, Edward Gay.
Russian drug cheats have opened the way for an 11th New Zealand rowing crew to compete at the Rio Olympics. The men's quadruple scull have been confirmed as the 11th New Zealand crew after a member of the Russian quad was banned for failing a doping test. The Russian crew won the last chance qualifying regatta at Lucerne to advance to Rio, with New Zealand finishing third and missing by just one place. George Bridgewater, who's one of the quad, told sports reporter Stephen Hewson he refused to believe he wasn't going to Rio.
It's been a bit of a roller coaster this last week in terms of being called back into training, and then finally today getting the confirmation. It's just it's fantastic news. We're all pumped. It was such a disappointment to miss out at the qualification regatta in Lucerne, and we missed out last year by one place as well in the earlier qualification rounds. So hopefully we can use some of that to drive us on.
You must have got to the point where you thought Rio just wasn't going to happen. There must have been, the gods were against you.
I guess there was certainly, as we crossed the finish line in Lucerne, we finished in third place and we needed a top two finish. for me, it was kind of, that was it. That was the end, and it had been a great 2 years, and I loved every perhaps not every day, but I loved most of it, and just to have that sort of, I guess that dream refloated in this last week has just been a new sense of life.
It must have been difficult though, getting back out on the water, being in that limbo.
It actually wasn't. It's I suppose being an athlete, you kind of do play mental tricks on yourself a little bit of the time, and like, for example, personally, I tricked myself into believing that it was going to happen, so I wouldn't entertain the thought that there was a risk that we weren't going to go, and I mean, clearly there was, but it's just too difficult to get motivated to go, and it's been a particularly wet week in Cambridge, and getting back into the things, you sort of, it's a bit of a shock, but yeah, hey, we've got a great bunch of guys now. We've been through a lot together, and it's a lot easier when you're doing it with other people.
How disappointing is it that it's come about, I suppose, through doping?
Absolutely. Doping is a cancer in sport. It changes the way that people view sport as well, and I've always felt that rowing has been somewhat immune from it, just by virtue that it's not really a spectator sport and there's not a lot of money involved. Yeah, I think I've always liked to think that rowing is a relatively clean sport compared to other sports.
Suspicions, presumably rowers talk. There must have been suspicions amongst yourselves as to how other crews are improving or going.
I guess that can occasionally linger, but to point fingers at people before you've got any hard evidence is just a really difficult thing to do. And coming back to that, my naivety, that I potentially don't think it's involved in our sport, but clearly it is.
George Bridgewater, who is going to Rio as part of the quad, talking to our sports editor Stephen Hewson. 28 to 6 on Checkpoint. Coming up on the program, the first man to get a free Keytruda infusion. This is the new immunotherapy regime in New Zealand. Joins us from outside the hospital. And finally, some good news on the ozone hole. I'm incredulous, but we'll hear more between now and 6. Nona is here to review what's happened to the world markets a week after Brexit. But first, Katrina Batten with RNZ headlines.
The police have arrested a fugitive after a major operation that shut down parts of a Palmerston North suburb for more than 24 hours. The wanted man, Caleb Kowaleski, surrendered to police at about 4:15 and is now in custody. The police say the situation was resolved safely, and the Manawatu Area Commander, Inspector Sarah Stewart, has thanked the Clovelly community for their patience, assistance and support. Mr Kowaleski, who had warrants out for his arrest, fled police in a grey Mazda, triggering an armed defenders squad call-out late yesterday morning. A scientist says the healing ozone over Antarctica could reduce the occurrence of sunburn and skin cancer in New Zealand. New scientific research shows that the ozone is recovering due to the decline of atmospheric chlorine from chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. The ozone protects biological species, absorbing high-energy ultraviolet light, but a hole developed over Antarctica over a period of time because of the use of CFCs. Australian voters are being warned of the chaos of a hung parliament as the 8-week-long election campaign draws to a close. The latest polls have tomorrow's election too close to call, with some commentators warning that both major parties could face some serious post-election challenges. Britain's Home Secretary Theresa May, the bookmakers' favourite to replace David Cameron as Prime Minister...
Wait, are these the same bookmakers that predicted Remain?
Yeah, probably.
Sorry for interrupting the headlines.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start that again, John Campbell. Britain's Home Secretary Theresa May, the bookmakers' favourite to replace David Cameron, well, now that Boris is gone as Prime Minister, says there's no going back on Britain leaving the EU. Mrs May, who backed the Remain campaign in last week's referendum, now says that she did so reluctantly. Meanwhile, the European Union's Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, says that Britain can begin negotiations on a new trade deal with the EU and other nations only after it has left the bloc. Ms Malmström suggests a long process of protracted talks lies ahead. Those are the headlines, interrupted by our nice host.
Someone's got to call those bookmakers. They know nothing.
Well, okay, well, yes.
Thanks,
I'll be back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Nona, this time last week we were all, I think, stunned mullets off the back of the realisation that Britain had voted to leave, contrary to what the bookmakers had predicted. A week on, where have the world markets settled and where have the currency settled in relation to the pound?
Well, first of all, we're talking about a shambolic result in terms of the reaction. The market was completely not prepared for what happened. And so, predictably, things were crazy, as you might recall from last Friday. Yeah. I certainly haven't forgotten it. In fact, this whole week has been a bit up and down. But look, at the end of this week, 1 week on, things are pretty much where they were before all of this started. Unless, of course, you're looking at the British pound. That's not so good. No.
Okay, so what's the pound done in the week?
Well, the pound, for the people watching, they might be able to see a graph that we've got that shows the incredible volatility there. It was wild, the movement, and it's not recovered. So the British pound lost an awful lot of ground. On Monday, it was still at a 31-year low from 1985 at 1.31 against the US dollar. Now, it recovered a little bit since then, but only just a bit.
Yeah. So it really has. It fell, it bounced around a little bit, but it's actually gone back pretty much to the level it had immediately after Brexit.
I don't know if you call it a grounder, but it was just basically bumping along the bottom. Really.
It is.
And I think it's going to stay there for a while. In fact, no one's really expecting any of this to go away. It's going to get worse, not necessarily better. Okay. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is pretty settled. I mean, things are where they were before, in some cases even better. In the case of the New Zealand dollar, for example, and again, if you're watching, you can see that this chart shows really that the New Zealand dollar ticked all the way up into an incredible high at 72 plus cents on the morning of the Brexit. And then, of course, with the bad news, it just dropped, to below 70 cents, just like that, bang. Now it's almost back to where it was before all this hysteria started. And so at this point, we're at 71.4 US cents, 95.7 Australian. Now that's really where we were before. And on the pence, we're at 53.6, which is where we finally settled after all of this this turmoil. Now, do I think that these things are going to stay here? No way. I mean, the share markets around the world have recovered. In fact, the New Zealand market is better than it was before Brexit started. So today, our NZX 50 was up 0.4%. That's up 29 points to 6,926. Is this going to last, you think? I don't need a bookmaker to tell you that the U.S. presidential election is going to make all of this change perhaps in a moment. So no bets here.
Yeah, thanks, Nona Peltier. Have a wonderful weekend, Nona.
You too.
Today marked an historic day for advanced melanoma patients who now have access to 2 publicly funded immunotherapy treatments. Opdivo, also known as nivolumab, is free to patients from today, courtesy of Pharmac, and drug company Merck Sharp & Dohme is bridging the cost of its drug, Keytruda, also known as pembrolizumab, from today until it's funded by Pharmac from September 1st, all things being equal. Barry was first diagnosed with melanoma on his arm 14 years ago. It's now returned, and in the last 6 months he's had some of his tongue removed, and he now has a tumour on his heart that is inoperable. I spoke to Barry a short time ago outside Auckland Hospital after he received his first infusion of Keytruda under this new regime.
Yes, the first one for New Zealand apparently, so it's quite an honour, and everything went well, wasn't any problem, so everyone's happy.
How did you find out about Keytruda? Who told you about it and when?
We were told last week by my oncologist, our doctor, and it's just gone from there, from a week ago till today. So until then it's been quite a mystery to us, or something that's just been a wee bit out of touch, but reality has set in and here we are.
And you've had it, the first in the country. What treatment were you getting before, Barry? Prior to Keytruda, what treatment were you getting for your cancer?
Whenever I had a tumour, John, the only way they could treat it was to remove the tumour. So I had 4 of those, and this one, they couldn't do anything with it. So with this new treatment coming up, I was fortunate enough to be selected to have it done.
And so you'd kind of hit the wall. Prior to immunotherapy, prior to Keytruda, there was really nothing more that could be done for you?
No, this was the last tumour I had. That was it. They couldn't do anything more for me. So I had open heart surgery last week. Sorry.
No, sorry, Barry. You go.
I had open heart surgery last week, and they opened me up and found the cancer had gone to my heart, so they just closed me up again and said they couldn't do anything with it. And then our oncologist said that the new drug was coming in and that I'd been chosen to do the first infusion, which is quite an honour.
And very exciting, because, you know, if it works, then it's going to make a real difference, isn't it?
Oh, certainly will, and not just for us, but everyone else that's got the hope of getting on the treatment.
Now, for people who are listening on the radio who aren't watching this, you're standing beside your rather glorious-looking wife, Anne. I hope you don't mind me describing her in those terms, Barry, but she looks absolutely lovely, and I bet she's excited about this too, is she?
Oh, you're right in both accounts, John. She's lovely and she's very excited. We're both very excited. Yes. So it's been quite a wild ride, actually, the last couple of months, but the last week has been so exciting for us that it's been beyond belief, really, that we're actually here.
Yeah. I can see on your arm a sticking plaster. Can you describe what happens when you get the infusion? Is that where it went in? Is it a drip? What is it?
Yeah, it's just a drip, John, and it takes an hour for the infusion to go in, then with the flush and everything. So it's just a normal drip in the arm. Yes, no problems, no hassles. It's all straightforward.
And is it every 2 or 3 weeks you're going back?
Every 3 weeks. I go for a check with the oncologist every other week, and then the second week we go for another infusion.
And Barry, what did your doctor, your oncologist, tell you about efficacy, about whether or not this might work, the kind of odds in favour of it working? Has that all been explained to you?
Yes, very well, John. We appreciate the way they tell us everything. There's nothing left out, so you're in no doubt if it doesn't work, this is the last step for us, but everyone's been so positive, and it's been smiles all around for everyone. So we're all very positive it's going to work, and that's the only way we're looking ahead. There's no other option, but it will work. Just one thing I'd like to say, John, the people in the oncology department here at Auckland and North Shore, they're just absolutely marvellous, and you couldn't ask for better people to help you on this journey. And we just like to say, both of us, like to say a big thank you to all involved. It's been marvellous.
So, Barry has Keytruda. It may extend his life, it may not. Other than that, there is nothing that can be done for him. The Cancer Society of New Zealand and oncologists throughout the country have been asking for people like Barry to be given immunotherapy treatment since last year. Dr. Christopher Jackson is an oncologist and medical director of the Cancer Society. I asked him when he believes the efficacy, effectiveness of Keytruda was sufficiently established.
2 pivotal studies were published in June of 2015 in the New England Journal of Medicine, presented at the world's largest cancer meeting, ASCO, and simultaneously in the world's largest medical journal. So the evidence came out more than a year ago, which demonstrated that both of these drugs improve overall survival in comparison to their comparator arms. So quite clearly in black and white, they improve overall survival, they help people live longer compared to any other treatment that we have had to this point.
Dr. Christopher Jackson, oncologist and medical director of the Cancer Society. So how many people might this have affected?
350 people a year die from advanced melanoma, John, and Pharmac estimates are that every year 350 people would be eligible for these drugs. And given that the first application went into Pharmac, I think it was about around September last year, the evidence came out in June of last year. That's a year between the evidence coming out and and the drugs being available. So in that year, 350 people by Pharmac estimates could have had that drug and could have benefited. I've looked after a number of patients over the last year who've heard about this data, who've read about it themselves, who've talked about it, who have not been able to afford it, who have not been able to get it, who have suffered, who have died as a result of not having treatment, and that's heartbreaking. The great news is that from Friday, we now have an option to offer our patients. I congratulate Pharmac on getting the deal together, and it's great news for the patients. But I'm worried that if we don't change some of the fundamentals, we're just going to have this debate again next time there's a new drug. And what we need is a clear distinction between the clinical effectiveness and the cost effectiveness. And oncologists around the country want to be part of that process, and we want to be involved.
Do we need a review of the process? If we are confusing clinical efficacy with cost, if they are muddying the waters of each other, and if we are disputing efficacy when in fact there doesn't seem to be any dispute, and that in part seems to be a cost issue, do we need to review the system?
Pharmac can't write a blank cheque to drug companies, nor should they. It is their absolute responsibility to ensure that they get the best possible deal for New Zealanders. But we also have to be straight up. And we have to say if the drug's too expensive, then it's too expensive, and then we need to put the blowtorch on the drug companies to get the prices down. But I will not sit with my patients and tell them the drugs don't work, because they do.
Dr. Christopher Jackson, Medical Director of the Cancer Society. To check the efficacy of these new immunotherapies, away from the emotional pressure of oncologists who have to deal with patients in New Zealand, we went offshore. We spoke to Dr. Anthony Rebus, an American oncologist and the principal investigator for the large phase 1 trial of Keytruda. He told us the efficacy of Keytruda has been established for a year. That was the research that led to it being funded in Great Britain and Australia. So we went to Australia. We contacted Georgina Long, medical oncologist at the Melanoma Institute Australia. She told us she had absolutely no doubt that therapies like Keytruda improved outcomes for patients with melanoma. She also said the drugs called anti-PD-1 therapies have revolutionised cancer treatment. So, as welcome as it is and as grateful as people are, why is Keytruda only becoming available in New Zealand now? I asked Pharmac's Director of Operations, Sarah Fitt, whether it was cost or efficacy.
So it was partly about the budget, but it was actually about the evidence and making sure that this was the right decision for quite a huge investment of money, quite a considerable sum.
What evidence has changed? In terms of Keytruda, what evidence has changed from June of last year?
So the evidence, I guess the feedback we've had, the trials have come out from nivolumab, which is the other agent.
No, Sarah, sorry. In terms of Keytruda, what evidence has changed since June of last year?
Well, what I'm coming back to is that with the nivolumab, the advice we've got in the last couple of months is that the clinicians in New Zealand consider these medicines are interchangeable. So they are happy to switch from one to the other. We didn't have that information until fairly recently. So that we're now treating these as one class of medicine.
Right. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm just confused why it took so long to get Keytruda to market. And in part that was about funding. You've said that the money became available in May. You've moved quickly since then.
Yeah.
But what data around efficacy has changed since June of last year, 12 months ago, 13 months ago?
The data has been, the data we don't feel at that stage was convincing enough. But
so
the data
what data is more convincing since then? What studies have you received since then? But we're talking about Keytruda here, aren't we?
Yeah, but what we're talking about here is a class effect. So that data, we now feel confident enough with the data with nivolumab is that we can treat these agents as the same. We didn't have that information a year ago.
It strikes me that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place here. You have an enormously difficult job. Medicine has never moved as fast, I guess, since the arrival of penicillin, really, in terms of suddenly we have a new class of drugs called immunotherapy. Chemotherapy wasn't working. These drugs are. People are reading about them on the internet and saying, I want them. You have finite budgets and you have to get value for money. I just wonder, was Pharmac singular enough in your pursuit of data around these drugs? Did you go back to the minister and say, hey, there is a case here for increased funding immediately? Should these drugs, particularly Keytruda, about which the data has been known for a year now, have been made available before now?
Well, there's many medicines that we would like funded. So, I mean, I guess as I mentioned, the hepatitis C agents are another extremely good example. These are medicines that provide a complete cure for 95% patients with 12 weeks treatment. So there's a whole range of new medicines becoming available all the time. And those are the discussions we've had, and that's why we did put forward a case for more money to be allocated to us in the budget. But in the meantime, we are reviewing the data. We're talking to the clinicians across many medicines and many different treatment areas. So we're looking at the whole package. We're not just looking at one particular group of patients. We have to ensure we're doing the right thing for all the patients in New Zealand.
With taxpayer dollars, and no one disputes that. Chris Jackson from the Cancer Society is saying you have to do that.
Yeah,
it's just
we take that responsibility extremely seriously, and we want to make the right decisions for
that's right, because this is taxpayer money, and
also with patients, we want to do the right thing for patients too.
Have you done that here? I mean, I just wonder what Chris Jackson is saying, and what the oncologists I've spoken to are saying is that it seems as if clinical efficacy, in other words, the way these drugs are working in unprecedented fashion, has been muddied with cost effectiveness. And Pharmac has not wanted to go to people and say, hey, we're not sure if we're going to do this because these drugs are too expensive. So you've hedged around efficacy to avoid telling that unpalatable truth.
Well, I mean, all the decisions we make are around clinical evidence and price. I mean, we can't ignore the price of these medicines. They're extremely expensive medicines, and we have to be sure we're making the right decisions. So we have been actively seeking out clinical evidence and talking to our clinicians on a very regular basis. It hasn't been sat on a shelf waiting for people to come to us. We've been actively working on, as I said, both these medicines, but a whole range of medicines for the last year. That's what we do. We're trying to invest in as many new medicines as we can to get those health outcomes for all patients. So that's what we don't sit around and wait for that information to come to us. And we, as I said, we've been in really, really intense negotiations with the suppliers of these two medicines for the last year.
Pharmac's Sarah Fitt speaking to us earlier this afternoon. It's coming up to 8 minutes to 6. Let's return to Brexit. And as everyone, I guess, knows by now, Boris Johnson has announced he will not contest the Conservative Party leadership, the Tory leadership. David Cameron's stepping down, of course. The exuberant former Mayor of London was the face of the Leave campaign, or one of them anyway, and looks set to steer the UK into Europe-less futures. But Mr Johnson's ambitions were dealt a blow when the Justice Secretary and fellow Brexit campaigner Michael Gove announced he would not be supporting him and would stand himself instead. The BBC's UK political correspondent Rob Watson reports from Westminster.
A week ago, Boris Johnson had just finished successfully leading a campaign that had kicked away a cornerstone of British foreign and economic policy of the last 40 years. It was widely assumed he would therefore be the next leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister, and the man to lead Britain out of the EU. At a news conference in central London, crowded with his expectant supporters and the media, he said this was a moment of extraordinary opportunity for Britain and its next leader, before dropping this bombshell, or punchline, as he put it.
Well, I must tell you, my friends, you who have waited faithfully for the punchline of this speech, that having consulted colleagues and in view of the circumstances in Parliament, I have concluded that person cannot be me.
What appears to have done for Mr Johnson were doubts among Conservative MPs about his colourful personality and his commitment to actually leaving the EU. His fate was sealed by the desertion of Michael Gove, one of 3 prominent Leave campaigners to now throw their hats into the ring for the Conservative Party leadership. But the frontrunner is now Theresa May, the Interior Minister who campaigned for Remain, but who now says Brexit must mean Brexit, and that what's needed now is a steady, no-frills, no-thrills politician like herself.
And I know I'm not a showy politician. I don't tour the television studios. I don't gossip about people over lunch. I don't go drinking in Parliament's bars. I don't often wear my heart on my sleeve. I just get on with the job in front of me.
Amid the carnage, clashing egos and simmering anger, perhaps a picture is now emerging, though, of a modern conservatism that involves a clear commitment to leaving the EU and to focusing on the anger among many of those who voted Brexit. But perhaps the last word on this extraordinary day should go to Lord Michael Heseltine, the man who challenged Margaret Thatcher for the leadership of the Conservative Party, only to lose out to John Major, and who now has this withering judgment on Boris Johnson.
He's ripped the party apart. He's created the greatest constitutional crisis of modern times. He's knocked billions off the value of the nation's savings. He's like a general that led his army to the sound of guns and at the sight of the battlefield abandoned the field. To the claims of his adjutant, who said he wasn't up to the job in the first place, I have never seen so contemptible and irresponsible a situation.
And as the smoke from the Brexit battle clears, serious doubts have also been raised about how carefully Leave campaigners had planned for a post-EU future that now stretches ahead of Britain's politicians, people and partners.
That's the BBC's Rob Watson. It's 4.5 to 6. The hole in the ozone layer has been healing itself, which could reduce the occurrence of sunburn and skin cancer in New Zealand. New scientific research published in Science magazine shows that moves to control ozone-depleting chemicals appear to have paid off. Here's our environment reporter, Kate Gudsell.
An ozone hole developed over Antarctica because of the use of chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, which break down in the upper atmosphere and decompose the ozone. A Waikato University chemistry lecturer, Joe Lane, says back in the 80s, restrictions were placed on ozone-depleting substances.
Those restrictions have finally started to take effect, and what we're now seeing is that the ozone layer is recovering, that hole is getting smaller over Antarctica, and hopefully should, a long-term, result in reduced incidence of things like melanoma and skin cancer, sunburn and the like in New Zealand.
An atmosphere and climate principal scientist at NIWA, Olaf Morgenstern, says New Zealand is the world leader in terms of certain types of skin cancer, because many people are of European extraction and are genetically programmed for much lower levels of UV.
Ozone recovery will contribute to an ever so subtle increase in ozone in this country, but it's not going to be large, and it's not going to change the outlook that, people of fair skin, like myself, for example, have to be careful when going out in summer, essentially.
CFCs are found in common household items like older refrigerators, old car air conditioning systems, as well as industrial air and refrigeration systems. They also used to be in everyday products like aerosols. But in 1987, almost every country in the world signed the Montreal Protocol in a concerted effort to ban the use of CFCs and repair the ozone hole. Dr. Morgenstern says if these restrictions hadn't been put in place, then the world would be on the path to a major catastrophe. He says we should try to learn from this success to tackle climate change, although it's a harder problem.
We can look at the Montreal Protocol and ask ourselves what caused it to be so successful. And partially it was so successful because those companies that made those CFCs saw money in the alternatives. And, maybe that could be a way to go in terms of how to phase out our usage of fossil fuels.
Yesterday, the Ministry for the Environment released its latest climate change projections for the coming decades. Drought severity is projected to increase in most regions, with hotter temperatures in the North Island and more intense winter rainfalls increasing the likelihood of flash flooding and overwhelming urban drainage systems. Among the likely impacts is an increase in summer mortality rates, business disruption, damage to biodiversity and transport infrastructure. Victoria University climate scientist James Renwick says ozone depletion is a much easier problem to tackle because the gases causing the problem were used in a narrow range of products and there were convenient substitutes for them, unlike in climate change.
With greenhouse gases and climate change, the gases come from activities that are at the core of the global economy, energy production, transport and so on. And finding substitutes like switching to renewable electricity for electric vehicles and all that, quite a lot harder. So it's taking a lot longer, it's a lot more complicated.
Dr. Renwick says it could take hundreds of years to deal with climate change, and we need to start responding now because the time delays are huge and we dally at our peril. For Checkpoint, Kate Gudsell.
Thanks, Kate. It's just about 50 seconds away from 6 o'clock. Just before the 6 o'clock news, we've just got a development on the standoff in Palmerston North. The police in Palmerston North have already had a media conference this afternoon to announce what we believe was the peaceful resolution of the standoff. Are having another media conference at 6:15. We will have our reporter Michael Kropp and also a camera there. So if you are watching us on Freeview or live streaming, you'll be able to watch the media conference from the police. Of course, you will be able to listen to that over the radio. We're not quite sure what that's about or why they're having a second one in the space of little more than an hour, but we will bring it to you live at 6:15. It's coming up to 6 o'clock on Checkpoint. We have Katrina with the news after the pips. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Lovely to have you with us. Thank you for being here, however you're joining us. Coming up, as I said, in about 15 minutes, a somewhat unexpected second media conference from the police in Palmerston North about the 30-hour standoff. Schools, kindies locked down, a community effectively closed off. We will go there live shortly. Plus, why the options for a future Auckland port are described as unattractive with major flaws. And a 12-year-old Indian boy kidnapped 6 years ago is reunited with his parents. Lots more coming up in the next 29 minutes. But first, here is RNZ News with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The police have arrested a fugitive after a major operation that shut down parts of a Palmerston North suburb for more than 24 hours. They say the siege has been resolved peacefully. Our reporter Michael Kropp is in Palmerston North.
The wanted man, 25-year-old Caleb Kowaleski, surrendered to police at about 4:15 and is now in custody. Manawatu Area Commander Inspector Sarah Stewart says the situation was resolved without injury or incident and thanked the local Cloverley community for their patience, assistance and support. Mr Kowaleski, who had warrants out for his arrest, fled police in a grey Mazda, triggering an armed offenders squad call out late morning yesterday. The police say scene examinations of the property where Mr Kowaleski was holed up are now underway. In Palmerston North, Michael Kropp.
Australians go to the polls in a general election tomorrow, and two final opinion polls point to a close finish between the ruling coalition and a Labour-led opposition. After 8 weeks of campaigning, both the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and the opposition Labour leader Bill Shorten have been out making last-minute pleas for votes in Sydney. The ABC's Anna Henderson reports.
Both Galaxy and Ipsos polls suggest tomorrow's race is going to go down to the wire. The Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has told Channel 7 he's not taking anything for granted.
It is critical that Australians treat their vote as though that vote, that one vote, is going to decide the next government.
The opposition leader Bill Shorten has brushed off questions about his leadership prospects if he falls short of expectations on election day.
I'm in this to win it.
The former Prime Minister Bob Hawke told a function in Sydney last night he expects a coalition victory tomorrow.
Anna Henderson in Sydney. A scientist says the healing ozone over Antarctica could help reduce the occurrence of sunburn and skin cancer in New Zealand. New research shows that the ozone is recovering due to the decline of atmospheric chlorine from chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. The ozone protects biological species, absorbing high-energy ultraviolet light, but a hole developed over Antarctica because of the use of CFCs. A Waikato University chemistry lecturer, Joe Lane, says the 1987 restrictions placed on the ozone-depleting substances through the Montreal Protocol have started to take effect. He says they should in the long term reduce incidences of melanoma, skin cancer and sunburn in New Zealand. A business group says building a new port in Auckland would need major international investment. A working group estimates a new port, which could be on the Manukau or the Firth of Thames, could cost between $4 to $5.5 billion. The Employers and Manufacturers Association's chief executive, John Campbell, says the new port faces huge infrastructure costs which can't be matched by the current port's profits. He expects the port could take up to 50 years to build. Mr Campbell says while many people want to invest in ports, it's unlikely there'll be greater interest yet due to long timeframes and planning issues. A judge says a repeat fraudster's promise to change her ways has been viewed with some cynicism. Yvonne Cash was jailed for 13 months when she appeared today in the Auckland District Court. The court was told Cash posed as a wealthy investor, promising to put money into businesses provided they helped pay money to free up funds held overseas. Although Cash told the probation services she was sorry for what she had done, Judge Kiernan says it was hard not to view that statement without cynicism.
If it is true, time will tell, of course. Perhaps this may be the last time that you appear in court for fraudulent offending, but given your history, I have to say that would be a huge change in behaviour.
Judge Kiernan said Cash had been convicted twice previously for fraud offences. Soldiers from several European and Commonwealth countries have held an overnight vigil at the Thiepval Memorial in northern France to mark the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme. Britain will hold 2 minutes of silence at the exact time when the offensive against Germany began. Historian Alexandra Churchill says the scale of the battle was huge.
It is the worst day in British military history, something like 60,000 casualties and 19,000 plus dead in one day. This is the biggest effort ever made by a British Army in a single day.
Alexander Churchill. 2,000 New Zealanders also died in the 141-day battle, and more than half of them have no known grave. In sport, after a man-of-the-match performance in the Chiefs' win over Wales, Stephen Donald gets a chance to shine again as the Chiefs take on the Crusaders in Suva tonight. It's Donald's first start in Super Rugby this season. The Chiefs' assistant coach Neil Barnes says All Black Aaron Cruden was fit to start, but Donald deserved a shot in the starting 15 after his strong showings in training and in the side's win over Wales.
Stephen's right across it. He's been driving it at trainings the whole time. So going on his form in the Welsh game, which we thought was pretty good, we thought we'd give him an opportunity to go out there and run the game for us. And obviously Aaron will be coming out at some stage.
It's the first time a Super Rugby game has been played in Suva. Meanwhile, New Zealand rugby boss Steve Tew says a global season could be finalised by the end of the year and implemented after the 2019 World Cup in Japan. The New Zealand tennis player Marina Irakovic will attempt to make the fourth round of Wimbledon for the first time when she takes on 12th seed Carla Suarez Navarro of Spain tonight. Just like the last round against a much higher ranked player, Irakovic feels she has a good chance.
Carla's got a very, very good hands, good slice, nice one-handed backhand, uses the court very well. But if I play my game and if I do my thing, I'll back myself. So just go into it like the same way.
A win tonight will guarantee Irakovic $150,000. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, once the FBI's most wanted computer hacker, Kevin Mitnick, has gone straight. He says people are always the weakest link, not technology. Wilko Johnson, former guitarist in British rock band Dr. Feelgood, is coming to terms with his commuted death sentence. And the West Coast celebrates 150 years since the arrival of King Dick Seddon. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Saturday. Northland to Waitomo and Taupo, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, fine with early morning frosts south of Auckland. Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taihepe, fine, a few showers spreading north tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, showers clearing Wellington and Wairarapa this afternoon and elsewhere this evening, fine tomorrow with early frosts. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with morning frosts. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine, a few showers tomorrow, turning to rain in Fiordland, later with heavy frosts. Otago and Southland, fine, high cloud increasing tomorrow with a few spots of rain from afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, showers and southerly gales easing later tomorrow. It's just gone 6:08 on Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We are going to go to Palmerston North, where the police are having a reasonably unusual second media conference in pretty quick succession to discuss the end of the siege that lasted, the standoff that lasted 30 hours in the suburb of Clovelly. The moment that begins, we'll go there. Our reporter Michael Kropp is standing by. Let's go to Turkey, though, where officials say 3 suspected Islamic State attackers at Istanbul's Ataturk airport came from Russia and Uzbekistan. The officials say the men entered Turkey from the IS stronghold of Raqqa in Syria about a month ago before bringing with them the suicide vests and bombs used in the attack. The death toll has now risen to 44 after 2 of those injured in the attack died in hospital. Here's Mana Rabi with the latest.
A chilling scene inside Istanbul's Ataturk airport. One of Tuesday's 3 attackers gunning down a plainclothes policeman. He then escapes into an elevator before helping launch the carnage that left scores dead and hundreds injured. Other newly released images show the 3 suspected Islamic State suicide bombers arriving at the airport on Tuesday. The 3 men opened fire outside to create panic, then 2 blew themselves up inside a terminal while the 3rd man detonated his explosives at the entrance. The death toll has gone up to at least 43 people, with some 240 others wounded in the attacks. Authorities have since arrested more than a dozen people in raids across Istanbul for allegedly providing support to the airport bombers or to Islamic State. And as families grieve, Turkish officials say the bombers were from Russia, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Thousands of foreign fighters from several countries have crossed Turkey to join IS in neighboring Syria. Critics say Turkey woke up to the militant threat too late.
That report from Mana Rabi in Turkey, of course. Let's go to Palmerston North now, where our reporter Michael Kropp is standing by. Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining us again. It's highly unusual to have 2 media conferences from the same police about the same events so close together. Have you any idea what's happening, why and when?
No. We don't know what's going to happen at this press conference. We know that the Mayor Grant Smith is going to be there, and again Manawatu Area Commander Inspector Sarah Stewart will be there. We expect both will thank the community, but we also hope that perhaps they'll talk about what charges will be laid and when a possible court appearance might be. I also just managed to get a very quick update on what's happened with the cordons. They're almost all gone. They're down to just 4 houses remaining where people can't get home tonight.
Thanks, Michael. We will come back to you the moment that media conference started. Michael Kropp, who is outside the police station in central Palmerston North. It's 6:11. The options suggested for a future Auckland port are being described as unattractive with major flaws, and that's by the man who was tasked with choosing them. The Port Future Study says new ports could be built on Manukau Harbour or on the Firth of Thames to replace the downtown port, which is running out of room. If you don't know Auckland very well, Manukau Harbour is on the west coast, on the way to the airport as you leave the city. They could cost between $4 and $5.5 billion. Rowan Quinn reports.
The demands on Auckland's port are growing as the city expands and ships get bigger and more frequent. The so-called consensus group, made up of interested parties like Ports of Auckland, iwi, business groups and technical experts, was tasked with coming up with a plan for its future. It's identified 2 options if the downtown port has to move, but the group's chair, Rick Boven, says none are ideal.
I think if you look at the 3 live options, you'll find that there are major flaws for all 3. And our challenge is to find the best among a number of unattractive options.
And it seems in the consensus group there was anything but.
I think it would be fair to say there was vigorous debate, and there were people who considered that the West Coast locations were preferred and people who considered that the East Coast locations were preferred.
Major infrastructure would have to be built alongside a Thames option like rail and better roads. But the Employers and Manufacturers Association Chief Executive Kim Campbell thinks the Manukau Harbour is the least viable.
Manukau is particularly problematical because the shipping companies actually don't want to go there. And the second thing, of course, it's still and will be, I imagine, for quite a long time, part of a dispute among the iwi, so it's contested.
Mr Campbell says building infrastructure in New Zealand is fraught with difficulties, which contribute to long timelines and enormous costs. The Chief Executive of Ports of Auckland, Tony Gibson, says the options may not be ideal, but they're the best the city has. He says it's good to be getting a plan together because it's very difficult to predict when the new port will be needed.
The trigger will be social, environmental, infrastructural, population growth, which will then bring a much greater demand.
Rick Boven says it's now time for studies into which option would work best. The group has recommended investigations into engineering needs, navigability, safety and land availability, as well as the views of iwi. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Rowan Quinn.
We've been looking at a lot of British politics over the past week or so, and after the very extensive and intensive coverage the US primaries had, Trump versus Clinton, we've gone off the boil a bit. But a meeting this week between US Attorney General Loretta Lynch and former President Bill Clinton is creating headaches for Hillary Clinton's election campaign. The meeting raising questions about the independence of the Justice Department, which is conducting an investigation of Hillary Clinton's private email server. Yes, that continues. Ms Lynch and Mr Clinton met briefly, privately on the tarmac in Phoenix earlier this week, but as Linda So reports, both sides say it was just an unplanned coincidence.
New questions are swirling after word got out that former President Bill Clinton met privately with U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch on Monday. This as federal investigators continue their probe into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server when she was Secretary of State.
I did see the president at the Phoenix airport the other night. As I was landing, he was headed out.
That meeting took place on the tarmac at a Phoenix airport. It lasted about 30 minutes on Lynch's plane, but the Attorney General insists there was no discussion about the email investigation.
He did come over and say hello and speak to my husband and myself and talk about his grandchildren and his travels and things like that. So that was the extent of that.
Both sides say the meeting was an unplanned coincidence, but that isn't keeping critics quiet, especially Republicans who have called for the appointment of a special prosecutor for Clinton's email investigation.
That report from Reuters. We're going to go live now to Palmerston North, the police station. And we're just going to take the media conference, which has just begun. This is Inspector Sarah Stewart.
Incident. I would like to very much thank the support of our community, who have been absolutely amazing in their support, assistance and patience in what was a particularly difficult time for many. We're incredibly thankful for those who weren't necessarily in the community, but who offered things such as accommodation, a place for people to go like the Cloverleigh Tavern, food, clothing and bedding. And we even had a nurse who came down and offered their assistance at the tavern for free to assist people who needed some help with medical advice. Our focus now turns to the investigation, and we will be working through that over the next few days, which includes a scene examination of the property. I can confirm that we did locate a firearm at the address. You'll appreciate this time there's a lot of detail that we cannot go into. But you will note that we have a lot of evidence to gather and will be continue to do that over the next few days. Again, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to the community and our police team who have worked so hard over the last few days to resolve this successfully, and also for the great support from the Mayor and others who have assisted us with those that were evacuated from their homes. Thank you.
I'd just like to reiterate the Commander's comments that community of Cloverleigh and here in Palmerston North.
This is the Mayor of Palmerston North, Grant Smith, speaking now.
Upmost it was around safety at first, but the patience shown by the whole community and the people that were displaced was admirable. The people that have helped, as the Commander said, through accommodation offers, medical assistance and food was outstanding. So we do really thank those people. And life can go back to normal for those people.
We're happy to take a couple of questions now if you have any.
What condition was Caleb found in?
Caleb.
We're going to drop out of that there. So that was a rather lovely community police conference held by the Manawatu Area Commander, Inspector Sarah Stewart, and the Mayor of Palmerston North. Grant Smith was sitting beside her, basically just wrapping up a successful conclusion to that 30-hour standoff and thanking the community for its patience and participation. If anything further arises from that, we will go back to it. We're going to go and talk some sport now. In just over an hour's time, the first ever Super Rugby match to be played in Fiji will get underway in Suva. The Chiefs have taken their home game against the Crusaders to Suva, which will kick off the Super Rugby tournament again after a 4-week break. Of course, the All Blacks were playing Wales. Our sports reporter Barry Guy joins us now from the Wellington studio. Barry, this is exciting on every level. First of all, they'll be delighted to have the game in Fiji. Secondly, this is a top-of-the-table crash between the Chiefs and the Crusaders, so it's just going to be a cracker, isn't it?
Well, it should be, and the conditions should be good. I actually haven't checked to see what the weather's like, but plenty of open running rugby, and the top two sides, after a 4-week break for the All Blacks, that you'd have to think they'd be rearing to go, wouldn't they? And they're going to bash into each other, which I know you and I like these clashes between the New Zealand sides. But it's interesting, John, this week to hear Tana Umanga say that perhaps in the future they should only play each other, the New Zealand sides, once during the season because it's taking too much out of them. And then Dane Coles also spoke this week, and he sort of felt the same thing, that these clashes between the New Zealand sides are just like test matches in a way, because they're bashing each other up and it's taking its toll. So while us fans only like to see perhaps the New Zealand sides clashing, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, because the South African teams, the good South African teams, also get to play the bad South African teams, and they are, with all due respect to them, pretty easy games. Same too in Australia, but there are no bad New Zealand teams. So all of the local New Zealand derbies are much tougher games, meaning more energy is expended, there is higher risk of injury, and the players get more physically jaded, right? And an example of this, I guess, tomorrow is the Blues, who are coming right incrementally against the Hurricanes in Wellington.
Exactly. We like watching these games because of all those things that you mentioned, but it's perhaps taking its toll on the players. And, the tomorrow night's game is going to be a great example because there's only 3 rounds left.
Yeah.
The Hurricanes are looking at the Blues. I think if they lose that, then they're gone, really. And the Highlanders, they're in South Africa and have got a match also. So it is tough. And this today also, the rugby union came out and said that they hope by the end of this year that there will be some global season put in place. It wouldn't happen until after the 2019 World Cup, but perhaps this would help in some way because those top players bashing each other up in Super Rugby, then it's June Tests, then more Super Rugby, then it's into the Rugby Championship, and then the end of season tour. So, the top guys are really going to be tuckered out by the end of that.
They're going to be tuckered out. And actually, I have to say, poor old Wales, who've been playing non-stop since the Rugby World Cup, which was in September, October of last year, coming out to New Zealand and getting biffed 3-0, which actually makes the English performance in Australia, because they'd played through too. Also more remarkable, talking of England and remarkable, Marina Irakovic at Wimbledon. Barry, that's great, isn't it?
It is, because for the last sort of 6 months, if not longer, she really seemed to be struggling. Perhaps it was because it was the hard court season earlier on, and then they went through the clay court season. Grass seems to be her thing. She's made the 3rd round twice before, and she also had qualifying, 3 rounds of qualifying, and I really do think that helps a lot of players. If you're used to the court and you've been playing for a week before you get to it. Really tough one tonight, though. Cara Suarez Navarro, the 12th seed from Spain. Yeah. And mind you, I think she's only made the 4th round once herself, the Spanish, and she's a clay court specialist. And I heard Marina today say that, she thinks she's got another good chance to make the 4th round for the first time.
She's quite self-effacing, Marina. She's very matter-of-fact in her assessment of herself. And I heard her on Morning Report this morning sounding really confident. And I thought that was wonderful. Who else is playing at Wimbledon tonight to go through to the quarters?
Yeah, some good clashes. Stan Wawrinka is playing Juan Martín Del Potro, which you would have thought would have been a good clash. Del Potro is a former US Open champion, but he slipped to about 160 in the world now because of injuries. We've also got Roger Federer playing a Brit, Daniel Evans, who I don't know too much about, and the top seed Djokovic is against Sam Querrey, the American. That'll be a good one. And both Serena and Venus Williams are in action tonight, and Serena, having listened to her a few times this week, she seems very mentally challenged to want to do well and win Wimbledon this year.
She is a fantastic tennis player. Barry Guy, just before you go, I know you sports boys hate it when I do this, but Chiefs Crusaders tonight in Fiji, who's going to win that? That is a nightmare to pick, isn't it?
Stephen Donald is playing.
Yeah,
How
wonderful.
about he has another outstanding game?
Yeah, wonderful.
And kicks a goal right at the end for the Chiefs to win, perhaps.
Thanks, Barry. Barry Guy, live from Wellington. If you don't know what Barry was joshing about there, Stephen Donald is, of course, the guy who came on at the end of the Rugby World Cup in 2011 and kicked New Zealand to victory, having not even been picked for the finals.
Legend.
Yeah, legend. In a jersey that didn't even fit him. And he's back tonight. Thanks, Barry. Have a great weekend.
And you.
A leading art critic is appalled a work by a prominent New Zealand artist is being permanently taken down from an office building that is being refurbished. The artist, Philip Trustram, is also upset his huge glass work draped around the front of the Terrace building in central Wellington is to be removed. Our reporter Laura Bootham's been looking at this.
The Terrace houses many government departments, and number 44 is no exception. But what does make it different from the rest of the more predictable architecture is a huge 55 metre by 5 metre LED light artwork entitled Northern Lights, installed in 1987. Philip Trustram says the building's owner, Kiwi Property, did not tell him or the creators of the stained glass, Suzanne and Ben Hanley, it was coming down.
They should have phoned me actually and said, we're taking it down and we're going to put it in storage till we decide what to do with it. That should have been the way they'd done it. That's the way the Christchurch City Council had done it. There should be some protection order on them, just stop any willy-nilly. We own the building, let's get rid of it.
Kiwi Property says it's being removed because it's not safety glass and lacks seismic resilience. But Philip Trustram says it's lead light, very strong, and would do less damage than a large pane of glass falling on pedestrians. Art commentator Hamish Keith agrees.
I'm appalled. Public art is exactly that. Public art is no use to anybody in a packing case. We've had plenty of that situation in Auckland and I guess around the country generally speaking. That work was there for public reasons. It was paid for by public money. It should remain as a public work of art.
Mr Keith says New Zealand has got better at protecting heritage buildings and needs to do the same to the preservation of public art. But the chief executive of Kiwi Property, Chris Gudgeon, says the building is being given a $10 million refurbishment and strengthened to withstand earthquakes. He says safety is paramount and the company cannot afford to take risks.
The glass in it is not safety glass, and we are concerned that in the event of an earthquake, it may not stay in place. We are taking the opportunity during this refurb to remove it, but we're removing it very carefully because there's some stained glass sections in it.
But Mr Keith says those reasons are specious.
If stained glass was an earthquake hazard or seismic hazard, then most of the cathedrals and churches in the country would be stripped of any of their windows. There's a kind of unfeeling view amongst some developers about public art, and that work should not be removed.
Suzanne and Ben Hanley made the stained glass windows. Ms Hanley says Northern Lights cost about $80,000 to $90,000 to create. She says she's shocked to learn that a work that's appreciated in value is being discarded by Kiwi Property.
When it went in, we went, well, this is great. This is an artwork that's pretty much going to be there forever. A lot of it's been paid for by public funding, and you don't see European cities taking their amazing artworks down and discarding them. They treasure them.
Chris Gudgeon says Kiwi Property has a proud heritage of supporting the New Zealand arts and hopes the artwork can be rehoused. Mr Gudgeon says the company hopes to find someone to take it and will talk to the Wellington City Council to see if anything can be worked out. For Checkpoint, Laura Bootham.
We'll let you know what happens there and where that art, that glass ends up. It's 27 minutes past 6, almost the end of the week for us. A 12-year-old Indian boy who was kidnapped 6 years ago and forced to work as a house servant in Bangladesh has been reunited with his parents thanks to the help of a good Samaritan. Mana Rabi has Sonu's story.
An emotional meeting for a New Delhi family with Indian Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj. 12-year-old Sonu Begum was kidnapped 6 years ago while playing near his house. He was reunited at last with his parents on Thursday after 6 long and difficult years for his mother. Sonu was reportedly found living as an overworked house servant in Bangladesh, where he was sometimes tortured. A good Samaritan there had apparently become suspicious and alerted child services to the boy's plight. Sonu reportedly gave officials a vague address in Delhi, and the Good Samaritan traveled to India to track down his parents. DNA results soon confirmed his identity. 2 women faced criminal charges for his kidnapping. Now Sonu's father calls the Bangladeshi Samaritan their angel. Today, all my worries have vanished, he says.
Lovely. We're going to end tonight in Wanganui, where the Sargent Gallery has been given a reprieve of just a week to find the rest of the money needed to ensure its survival. The gallery has needed to raise $10 million by today to trigger a matching contribution from the government towards a $34 million redevelopment, which includes earthquake strengthening and a new wing for the rather wonderful gallery atop the hill in downtown Whanganui. This week it was still trying to raise more than $2 million to meet its target. The gallery, clad in Oamaru stone, is a severe earthquake risk and has been mothballed since 2014. Whanganui reporter Robin Martin spoke to senior curator Greg Anderson at the gallery and asked him what the public could expect from a redevelopment.
I think they can expect one of the finest exhibiting and collecting spaces in the country. It's going to be the first time in the Sergeant's history where we'll be able to fully exploit and exhibit our wonderful collection. The collection is a nationally significant collection, something like 8,300 items in all media in the collection, and for the first time ever we'll have proper environmentally controlled and secure spaces in which to show it. So we hold here at the Sergeant and in Whanganui a very large portion of New Zealand's cultural heritage. So helping us to complete this build will not only mean that the Sergeant is guaranteed, the Sergeant's legacy is guaranteed for another 100 years or so, but it means that we'll have a fantastic addition to New Zealand culture. And we're working very strongly with Whanganui iwi in this sense as well. I mean, the new wing, when it's constructed, will be named in honour of Sirachi Tairoa, who was an important iwi figure as well. So, I mean, the entire future of the gallery and Whanganui is predicated on excellent relationships with Whanganui iwi, and the future's looking pretty bright for us.
Really is a lovely gallery, the Sergeant. That ends Checkpoint for this week. Checkpoint is made by a fabulous and hard-working team on behalf of all of them, on behalf of all of us. Thank you for being with us. See you Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police have arrested a fugitive after a major operation that shut down parts of a Palmerston North suburb for more than 24 hours. Australians will vote tomorrow in an election in which polls are pointing to a close finish between the major parties. The healing ozone over Antarctica could help reduce the occurrence of sunburn and skin cancer in New Zealand. And soldiers from several European and Commonwealth countries have marked the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme. 2,000 New Zealanders died in the 141-day battle in northern France. Our next news and weather is at 7. This is Trending Now.